As you know, the US is sending high-powered military hardware to Ukraine. But what happens after it gets there? That is the concern. Weapons sent to Ukraine after Russia's invasion in February will end up in a global hidden economy and in the hands of criminals. The head of Interpol has said, "Not since the last World War has so many weapons been sent from the United States to battlefields in Europe. A fact that has enabled Ukraine to resist in front of a formidable Russian adversary." But the influx of guns into a country with a long-term corruption problem has also raised concern, good faith and bad, that the fog of war could provide covers for a booming trade in illicit arms. Russia said that the West's supplies of advanced weapons to Ukraine were finding their ways into the black market and then into the hands of extremist and criminals groups in the Middle East, Central Africa and Asia. Since Russia's launched its war in Ukraine on February 24, the biggest land invasion in Europe since World War II, Western powers have sent Ukraine weapons in an attempt to help forces fighting Russian troops. Maria Zakharova, Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman, said that NATO members had in total sent at least 700 artillery systems, 80,000 missile systems, 800,000 artillery shells, and 90 million rounds of ammunition. A considerable part of these weapons have already entered or will soon enter the black market, Zakharova told reporters in Moscow. Now the world community is facing this. Some security officials are concerned. Interpol expressed serious concern about the delivery of small and heavy weapons to Ukraine that can end up in the hands of criminals in Europe. Agency head Jürgen Stock urged countries supplying military equipment to Kyiv to focus on tracking mechanism. The concern came after the US armed forces exited Afghanistan in 2021 following 2 decades of war and left huge amount of military equipment which eventually fell into the hands of Taliban. Stock said the heavy military weapons will be available on the criminal market. After the former Yugoslavia broke apart, it too became flush with guns despite the Western arms embargo that later spread it across Europe. In 2015, a study by the Flemish Peace Institute, a research group that tracked the flow of weapons in Europe, found that the majority of guns on the black market came from the Balkans. Niels Diequist, director of the institute, said that Ukraine post-conflict could likewise fuel the illicit arms trade. Experience from previous military conflict, such as the Western Balkans, shows that when a high volume of small arms and light weapons is available in one region, it could likely lead in a mid and long term to trafficking of these weapons to other regions, especially after the conflict is over or its scales became limited. Indeed, this could become a destabilizing factor, in particular for nearby region and also significant threat to the EU and Ukraine, because organized crime groups and terrorists could have access to these trafficking weapons. European authorities say the same thing. Katarina Wolkman, a spokesperson for Frontex, the European Border Control Agency, told Insider it has detected a spike in firearms crossing between nations. But she said it was not clear whether these detections were due to increased smuggling activities or enhanced border checks. For the duration of the war, Wolkman added it could be expected that most weapons in Ukraine will stay in the country, but a ceasefire or an end of armed conflict could lead to an increase in arms smuggling out of the country. The Asian Times has already reported that Ukraine had a bad reputation as a hub of smuggled arms and ammunition even before the Russian invasion, and after the invasion this image has further worsened. The Asian Times reported how weapons delivered by Western countries to Ukraine to counter the Russian offensive had been advertised for sale in the Middle East and North Africa. What can these arms do on the black market? Criminal groups try to exploit this chaotic situation and the availability of weapons, even those used by the military and including heavy weapons. This will be available on the criminal market and will create a challenge. No country or region can deal with it because these groups operate in a global level. Small arms and pistols are one thing, but Ukraine has also been provided more advanced weapons. Washington, for instance, has provided the country armed forces more than 1,400 shoulder-fire Stinger anti-aircraft systems or manpads, which are capable of taking down a commercial aircraft. The Biden administration has also delivered more than 10,000 grenade launchers and small arms to Ukraine, along with more than 60,000 rounds of ammunition. Similarly, the UK has sent more than 5,000 point-and-shot anti-tank missiles to Ukraine, weapons that can easily target and destroy most moving vehicles. Ukraine has also received a huge stash of weapons from neighbors like Poland. The fact that such arms are being provided to Ukraine and on a such scale indicates that Washington and its alliance are less concerned about arming a military with a central command than a decentralized network of rebels. What measures are taken? Incidentally, as the Pentagon rushes to replace billions of dollars in weapons sent to Ukraine, its acting Inspector General Sean O'Donnell has told Bloomberg in an interview that he is on a high alert for signs of fraud and abuse in the thousands of contracts being awarded. Defense Attaché General Garrick Hardman has arrived in Kyiv for arm control and monitoring. However, Ukraine authorities cannot pin down the exact location of the arms and other military equipment supplied by the United States, as all of their accounting is done on paper by using hand recipes, Sean told Bloomberg. He added that he doubts the Kyiv authorities have much fidelity regarding where the arms end up. Jonas Ohman, founder and CEO of Blue Yellow, a Lithuanian-based organization, says that just 30 to 40% of the supplies coming across the border reach its final destination. Ohman points out how a combination of Ukrainians constantly shifting front lines with its extensive volunteer and paramilitary forces, many from foreign countries in their capacities, and the mercenaries has made delivery of military aid difficult for those attempting to navigate the dangerous supply lines to their destination. As a result, some weapons fall into Ukraine's black market, which has thriven on corruption since the collapse of the Soviet Union. There are like power lords, oligarchs, political players, he adds, describe the corruption one has to work around. But then, controlling the flow of weapons on the battlefield is generally tricky, mainly when the donors are not fighting the war in Ukraine. At best, they can monitor. In July, to combat this trade, the European Union announced it was creating a new hub in Moldova to combat gun trafficking, with security experts from the bloc coming to Chisinau to assist local law enforcement. Moldova is not a member of EU, but the country which borders Ukraine is seen as a ground zero for the fight against illicit arms dealers. At the time, EU Home Affairs Commission Ylva Johnson said that there were some indications that such trafficking was already taking place. Indeed, it is just on a minuscule scale. In September, the Moldovan Ministry of Internal Affairs announced the creation of a new unit dedicated to combating illicit arms trafficking. In a press release, the ministry said there has been a spike in the trade over the previous 6 months, with policy confiscating 12 times as many weapons compared to the same period in 2021. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you find this content helpful, smash that like and subscribe button, turn on the notification bell to be notified every time I post a new video, and see you in the next video. Stay safe.